everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited for the next project I'm planning to make. I'm going to use these curtains right here to make a really cool dress. And this is a pretty thick fabric which should work really well for the design I'm going for. This does kind of look like tweed, which I really like, and I'm also thinking about maybe painting it a little bit to give it some extra color. But yeah, I'm really excited to get started. To make the pattern, I wore a shirt I didn't mind ruining. Mine was from the old job I worked, but you can use whatever shirt you want. I used masking tape to cover my torso in the general shape of what I wanted the finished bodice to look like, but I made sure I taped more area than I actually needed because I'm going to mark and cut out the exact pattern later. And the back was really hard to do on myself, so I had to ask someone else to do it for me. But this is after I was done masking tape everything, and then now I am going to just mark and cut out everything. I basically just marked where I wanted all the seams to go, and then I took my scissors and cut along those lines. Though obviously that's hard to do when it's still on me, so I cut along one of the side seams so I could take it off, then cut all the pieces out, and I made sure I marked out which piece was what so that I would know what it was. At this stage, it doesn't have to be perfect because I am going to transfer them onto paper, but it's just so that I know they fit me and that the shape is correct. So I just transferred all the taped shirt pieces to paper and added seam allowance around all the sides, and I'm going to cut all these pieces out on my lining right here as a mock-up, but also if it fits good, then it can just be my lining. I just cut one of each piece because it is an asymmetrical top. Don't mind the stains on that bottom piece, it's just water because my iron leaks a lot. This is what it looked like when it was all sewn together, and once I tried it on, it fit really good, so I just went ahead and started cutting it out on my real fabric. The side I left open is also the side where my zipper is going to go. And I basically repeated the same steps for the lining as I did for the main fabric. It just you have to be careful that when you're sewing them together, you make it mirrored from the lining, because it is asymmetrical, which means that if you sew it the same way, then the lining won't go in properly because they'll be facing opposite directions. That was a mistake I made, so I had to undo all the lining sewing and redo it. So hopefully you don't make that same mistake. And as I mentioned before, these were curtains that I bought at the thrift store, so this was actually a very cheap dress to make. And the top of the curtain where those big rings are, it kind of reminds me of the eye part of a plague doctor mask. So I'm kind of thinking, what if I made a plague doctor mask out of the scraps I have left? And here I'm just pinning and sewing all the pieces together. So fun! The idea to make this dress has actually been on my mind for a really long time, but I was waiting until winter break to actually start the project. But then once I got into winter break and started this project, I realized I could have started at any point. Like, it's fine, I can just work on it after school. And yeah, I don't know why I wanted to say that, but I did. Once I had my main bodice and my lining bodice, I pinned them together and sewed right here because I wanted finished edges all along the neckline and the armhole. I thought a long time about how I wanted to add the pleats along the neckline, and so I wasn't sure if I should make finished edges along the neckline already, but I decided, yeah, I'm just gonna do it, yeah. And then I trimmed down all the seam allowance so that I could flip it right side out through the straps. So this is what the bodice was looking like, And now I'm going to sew the side seam that is on the same side as the strap. To do that, I'm just going to sew the right side of the lining to the other side of the lining, and same with the main piece. So I'm just sewing it all along the side, and then once I turn it right side out, it's also a perfect bodice. And now here I am making the pattern for the skirt because I wanted it to be asymmetrical. So basically I measured out my waist and my hips and then the length I wanted it to be, and I used those measurements to make a front panel and a back panel. And yeah, that's basically what I did for my skirt. At first, I wasn't sure if I could get away with only 2 panels because I did want it to be quite a fitted skirt, but I'm not very curvy, so yeah, it ended up working out pretty fine. Though looking back on it, I should have also probably measured the waistline of the bodice I made, because the waistline of the skirt and the waistline of the bodice did not fit together at all when I sewed them together. This is what the final skirt pattern looked like. I know it looks short, but that's because we're gonna add long pleats to it. And again, I started out by making the pattern on my lining just to make sure it fits good before I cut it out on my real fabric. This was very simple, just a front and a back piece, and I just sewed up one of the side seams because the other one was going to have the zipper, so I couldn't sew that up yet. And I made a few adjustments, so this time I used my lining with the under adjustments to cut out my main fabric just so I didn't have to remake all the adjustments on the paper. And then with the main fabric, I did the exact same thing of sewing up one of the side seams and leaving the other one open because again, there's gonna be a zipper there. And just to reiterate here, you also want to make sure that you sew the main fabric mirrored to the lining, because otherwise, since these are asymmetrical, they won't go in properly. And yeah, you can see here that I sewed up the short edge because the long edge is going to be where the zipper is. Then to attach the skirt to the bodice, I pinned the lining of the skirt to the lining of the bodice and the main skirt to the main bodice and just sewed those two up together with a normal straight stitch. And I haven't talked about this yet, but it is very important that you're pressing all your seams open and flat, because especially with the main fabric, which is very thick, it's crucial that you press it so that it looks nice and clean. Then I could go on to making the pleats, which is the part I was the most excited for. I was so excited for this part. And to do this, I was going to make box pleats. So I measured out the neckline and the hemline separately, of course, and then multiplied it by 3 because I would need triple the amount of pleating fabric so that it can fit perfectly onto the part where I wanted to fit into. And I just measured the length that I wanted my pleats that go on the bodice and the pleats that went onto the skirt, and just cut them according to that length. And the pleats for the skirt, I actually wanted it to go like from short to long, so I kind of made it like a diagonal instead of a straight piece. And I had one for the front and one for the back, and I cut them out mirroring each other so that one of the short to long can go in the front and one of the short to long can go in the back. I don't know if any of this makes sense, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing and see what I did. Oh yeah, and I did use the already hemmed curtains to my advantage so that I didn't have to rehem it. Though when I was sewing together the hemmed parts, I undid the hem a little bit so that I could sew them together without sewing together the hem, and I just remade the hem so that it looks nicer. But as you saw, I put together all the pieces so it was one long piece. One for the neckline and one for the skirt. And right here you can see what I meant by undoing a little bit of the hem so that I can sew it up and then remake the hem so that it looks nice and goes across. And next came the painting part, which I was super duper excited for as well. So I just used this gold paint that I have. I think it's just acrylic paint, and I actually needed quite a lot of it, but that's fine because I had so much fun painting it. And for the gold, I wanted it to look like kind of an ombre going from gold to pink, and I wanted the gold part to be near the hem part. So that's exactly what I did. I just kind of painted it, and this was really relaxing and nice. And I did do it on a carpet, so I put paper underneath to make sure that it didn't get on the floor. But after I painted it and after I waited it for it to all dry, I started marking out my pleats. So I marked out every 2 centimeters so that my pleats would be 4 inches long. I needed a lot of pins and a lot of time for this, but it's fine because honestly, making pleats are really fun. Yep, and this is what all my pins looked like next to each other. Yeah, you can imagine how long this took. But basically, I just, put the pins together to make box pleats. The fabric was pretty stiff already, and the part with the gold paint was even stiffer, so it was kind of difficult to maneuver the fabric and make it all lie nicely, but I wasn't really worried about that now. I was like, you know what, I'll just take care of that later. But yeah, it just kind of got to me, so I did pin down the first bit. Like, as you can see, I pinned down the bottom part, but I didn't have enough of those clamps, so I just kept pleating it. And yeah, I just went through this lengthy process of pinning out every 2 centimeters and then pleating that all up and continuing that until all of the fabric was pleated. And after I made all the pleats, this is what it looked like. It's so shocking how much shorter the fabric got once it was pleated, but it's fine, and I just sewed all the pleats down so that they wouldn't go anywhere. And then I ironed down each and every single pleat so that it looks nice like this. And then I did the exact same process to the bottom part. So you can see this one has a little variation in length of the pleats, but I just followed the same exact process of painting and pinning and pleating. And then I started out attaching them to the dress with the skirt pleats, and I just pinned them right sides together to the bodice, both the lining and the main fabric, and I just sewed it all up. And I did intend for there to be a little bit sticking out just to be on the safe side, so that I wouldn't have not enough pleats. Then I sewed on the pleats for the neckline. At first, I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to do it, but I decided that I would sew the right side of the pleats to the wrong side of the bodice and then flip it around, and then so the pleats would just hopefully lay nicely right there. And I'm really glad I did it that way because I really liked how it turned out. And then I ironed the seam allowance of the skirt pleats towards the pleats. And for the one on the neckline, I folded it a little bit so that you can't see the lining, so that a bit of the pleats are on the inside. And I should have done this earlier, but I added in my little name tag thing. And then I sewed in the zipper. That was pretty much the last step. It did take me a couple tries to get it right so that the zipper was in so that it fits me good. And then also the skirt didn't fit right in with the bodice, so I did have to trim that a little bit. But eventually I got it right, and I sewed up the side seam underneath the zipper. And yeah, it ended up working out great. But before I sewed in the zipper, I made sure to baste together all the layers, the lining, the main fabric, and also the pleats where there were pleats, just so none of it would move around as I was trying to sew in the zipper. And this is the finished dress! I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out, though I do wish I could have made the pleats look more continuous where the zipper and that side seam was. I'm really glad I put the zipper on the side instead of the back though, because that was actually something I was thinking of doing. And in general, I'm just so glad I got to finally make this dress because this idea has been in my mind for so long. And thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. And bye! See you next time!